Welcome to DCA Committee, and particularly to the great Bristol public, of course. We have just 3 simple rules. Firstly, if you have a mobile, please switch it off or on silent. Secondly, if you need to use the lavatories at any time, they're either side of the main entrance. Thirdly and finally, there's no fire alarm plan, so if it goes off, it should be the real thing, sadly. So you leave the entrance, go down the ramp on the right, and assemble by the piazza of Bristol Cathedral. Could I say, if there's anyone who doesn't know, the second item on our agenda today, the Vassall Centre fish ponds, has been deferred pending a site visit. I believe that's what the majority of the public objectors desired. So not only have we met their requests there, but it also allows us more time for public forum for the Bristol Zoo application. What I will say, we do have a maximum time of 30 minutes under public standing orders. So it's unlikely we'll manage to get through to the end, of course, but we'll do as many people as possible. I've got a list in front of me, and I'll call you. If you make your way to the central aisle, that will be fine. Every member has seen your written submission and had 24 hours to read it, so you only have a minute per person to actually summarise the issues at stake. Please do that. And can I make a request, please? Members on this committee are by law required to make their decisions purely on material planning considerations. They are things like land use design, traffic implications, and the effect on the residential amenity of neighbours. There are other things mentioned, of course, by some of the protesters, like the financial viability of the proposals or the financial health of the trust, which fall outside that. So frankly, you'll be doing yourself and the members here a disservice if you waste your time, your 1 minute talking about that. So please try to address yourselves to the key planning issues we need to understand. So that's very much all I wanted to say. Or I would also add, it's great to see a packed public gallery and chamber, of course, and I'm delighted so many of you wish to speak to your issues. What I would say is clearly people here gathered either have strong views for or against the application, which is fine and to be understood, but please respect the other people's right to actually have their own view, and we don't want any actual extraneous noise, of course, when public forums are submitted. So that's all. Ali, are there any apologies?
No, Chair, no apologies.
So thirdly, we have declarations of interest. Councillor Varney.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yes, I'm an employee of one of the stakeholders, Clifton College, but I confirm there's no pecuniary interest and no predetermination on my part.
Thank you. Councillor Vehance.
Yes, at your request, Chair, all 3 of us did attend a brief Zoom meeting with, yes, we talked about this beforehand, with some residents, but again, this is not predetermined. It better informed us to make our opinions. Thank you.
Do any other members have interest? No.
Chair, yeah. I have, throughout my time on this committee, made it absolutely clear any meeting I've met with objectors or developers, I've prefaced my meeting with saying that I'm preparing for a committee.
To reassure you, Councillor Plowden, yeah. I personally have no issue or trouble. My view would, I said to Councillor Hance and other members, in the interest of actually accessibility, good value. I wanted us to make a clean breast of things, so I prefer to go the extra mile and play safe.
The thing that concerns me, and I think maybe many members of the public here today, is that the Mayor of Bristol is the strategic lead for the Labour Party on planning, and yesterday chose to give his blog to the applicant. And I have no reason to suspect that the Labour Party members of this committee are anything other than uphold the highest standards. But I wondered if they might like the opportunity to explain how they are making sure that their propriety is upheld given the circumstances.
I've given you the chance to actually express your view, but you know perfectly well every member of this committee actually knows the councillor's code of conduct for planning and adheres to it, and the request I've made to declare any interest was made in that spirit. Also, clearly, the members on this side or any side are not whipped, of course, in planning decisions, so I don't think we need to go beyond that. Councillor, you can speak, but I prefer not to actually spend time on this issue.
Just to say, I've spent all my last waking hours reading all the stuff to do with the plan, reading all the stuff that's been emailed to me. I haven't had a moment to read the Mayor's blogs.
Fine. Thank you. In my view, that was better use of your time than reading the Mayor's blogs, but possibly one is biased, who knows. Item 4, minutes of the last meeting, 21st of December. You'll be very lucky if you've got a good enough memory to remember this. Can I move there a correct record? Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Andrew. Passed. The action sheet, item 5, there's only one item about planning enforcement and benchmarking. Originally, Mr. Collins hoped to have a verbal report for this meeting. He doesn't, but we'll take it to a meeting in the new civic year, and at Councillor Hans's request, we'll have a written report so members can study that. Appeals, item 6, Gary.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a very long list, I think, because as a result of the committee not meeting for a little while, so it's longer than normal. Unless I'm mistaken, there's no particular decisions in there that relate to decisions made by this particular committee, so I wasn't going to offer any further commentary, but clearly I can answer any queries as best I can if members do have questions.
Do members have any queries? Gary, Ed.
Gary, you kindly circulated something which I also have been focused on the zoo application, haven't had a chance to read, which is Brislington Meadows. And I was wondering if you'd like to just highlight the key issues that the planning inspector chose in making his or her determination.
Yes, happy to do that. So this was obviously a high-profile case. The resolution in terms of the council's case at appeal was made by DCB. So I did give DCB more of an extensive briefing because they were sort of more invested in the sort of planning issues there. So following an appeal against non-determination, inquiry was held earlier this year. We received the decision at the start of last week. Unfortunately, the planning inspector allowed the appeal and has therefore granted outline planning permission for the development on the site, which is for 260 new residential dwellings on the site. As you can imagine, over 3 weeks of a public inquiry, a lot of issues were gone into, some into real significant depth. But as a summary, the inspector gave significant weight to the fact that the site is allocated in the adopted local plan, that the city does not have a 5-year housing land supply, and that, so therefore we had to weigh that, and the benefits of housing delivery and affordable housing had to weigh that against the specific harms of the proposal, which included loss of hedgerows and also trees. Now, the council had pursued a case that a lot of the trees on the site actually were veteran trees, which are irreplaceable habitat through the MPPF, and we presented an expert witness and evidence on that basis. The inspector, however, considered that apart from the 2 trees on the boundary that had already been identified, the trees within the hedgerows were not veteran trees, so therefore that they did not benefit from that significant level of protection. And so whilst the inspector recognised that there would be harm through, quite substantial loss of trees and hedgerows on the site, the fact that the site was already allocated for housing development and there were all the other benefits, and that's why the inspector came down on the side of allowing the appeal.
Could I ask one follow-up question? Chair, for some time ago, the Secretary of State wrote a letter to all planning authorities, and I'm struggling to understand it, and I've asked for a briefing repeatedly. Gary, you've been busy and not able to provide that. Am I to understand that the 5-year supply and housing targets are still very much there, and this is just a sort of notice of intent to change them, or is that already changed?
So the whole issue about 5-year land supply was sort of in the draft changes to the MPPF, and I thought I had circulated a kind of a general report on all of those points. And the Secretary of State had chosen to write to planning authorities in advance of that, in terms of relaxing that. That's still under consideration. The consultation has ended, but there have been a significant number of consultation responses, as you can imagine, on the whole issue of the MPPF. So at the moment, the current arrangement for 5-year land supply and the presumption in favour of sustainable development, which was pivotal in the Brislington Meadows decision, still absolutely applies. We did cover that at the public inquiry, and it was really clear from all parties that until the MPPF changes in whatever way, then it still absolutely applies.
Tom?
Thank you, Chair. Gary, my question was about appeals for non-determination. Obviously, this list is quite long, and I don't know what the proportion of the appeals, how this compares to them in the past, whether we're getting more appeals for non-determination, and what the plan is to reduce the risk of that, given the backlog we've got.
So we did look at the statistics for non-determination appeals a little while ago, and they've increased over the last 2 to 3 years, but certainly the last municipal year they did spike quite a bit, really, and I think you've seen that yourselves through the ones that are listed. So they are increasing, and there are implications of that. The council still gets to make its case, but in an accelerated way, really, because you get the appeal deadline set and you have to meet it. So it is having an impact, and I think the answer to try and deal with that is to completely try and tackle the backlog, and that's both a resource and a process issue, which we're in progress of doing now.
Tom, that was an intelligent question, but I would urge you also to remember we've had 2 meetings cancelled, so we've got a very, very long list, but we still need to know you're right. And of course, with the present delays in the system, appeals based upon non-determination are more of a factor now than they were, say, 2.5 years ago. Andrew?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Gary, just to go back to Brislington, but this time Brislington West. So there are quite a number of outstanding appeals, especially the former Wyvale Garden Centre. And that's been the case for quite some time. And I'm just wondering, have an idea of timelines when we think a decision might be made?
Yes, thank you. And certainly those appeals are very high on my list as well. I think they've been dealt with by written representation, so it's a little bit harder to track the timescale for those decisions. Certainly all the evidence has been put in by both sides on that. So I think we're awaiting the inspector's decision on those. It's different when you've got a hearing and an inquiry, because you've got a date to work to and you can estimate how long then the decision will take to come out. But I will ask the officer involved with that just to give us his best estimate as to when those decisions are likely to be made, because I know they're important to you.
Fine. I've just got one further comment on this. Obviously, all appeals which are lost by the local planning authority aren't good news, of course. I notice actually, as well as the Brislington Meadows one, which is a cause of personal distress, there were several other appeals against DCB refusals, which was successful, and costs were awarded against the council, of course. If we have one small crumb of comfort, perhaps it's that it wasn't DCA, of course. All I would point out, one report, one decision in particular, item 75, land at Marksbury Road, does confirm garrison officers' advice if we want to actually refuse. We've actually had cost awarded against the council, partly on the basis that we, or the committee, threw the kitchen sink at the reasons for refusal, rather than majoring on the main ones, which could have been sustainable. So again, I'd just like to underscore officers' advice there. So with that, can we move on to enforcement item 7, Gary?
Thank you, Chair. And again, as per the appeals report, maybe the list is slightly exaggerated because this is, 3 meetings worth of notices. However, still pleased to see, as ever, evidence of notices being served. So we've got 5 listed there in the papers. And I think I've also noticed a real kind of increase in formal notices being served, and because we've reached year end of our statistics, every year we measure what percentage of cases where there's a breach, what percentage have we served formal notices, and last year just gone, I think it's the highest for about 3 or 4 years, so it needs to be sustained as per the discussion at Growth and Regen scrutiny, but I think there's positive signs there, and that's evidenced by also by the notices that you see before you.
Right, thanks. Any questions, Tom?
Thanks. I just had a question about cost recovery. In our ward, we've raised a couple of cases with planning enforcement where the resultant action has been for the people to submit a retrospective planning application, and I wondered whether there's any cost recovery for the officer time in getting them to that point, or is it, is it a drain on resources for them to get to that stage?
At the moment, with the nationally set fee regulations, there's no factoring in of the extra work that's probably being required to get a retrospective application in. But the fee regulations have been subject to consultation recently, and I think they're due to be the new ones are due to be enacted probably September, October this year. And so, all I can say is I just hope that there is something in there about retrospective applications. But at the moment, no, there's no factoring in of cost recovery. It wouldn't be that sophisticated going forward anyway, because they're nationally set. But there might be like a punitive element to retrospective applications going forward. But until we see the new regulations later this year, I can't say any more really.
All right. So we'll move on to item 8, public forum. So I've got a list of those submitted speakers, so I'll call those out. If you would come to the central mic to summarise your statement in a minute, please, that would be helpful. There are traffic lights either side of me. Obviously green, amber and red. As you're approaching the end of your 1 minute, it will go red. Clearly, if you could seek to stop then, I'll allow people to go on for a couple of seconds, but I will have to stop you then. Actually, I assume that's Mr. Ray there. We've got 3 questions. Do you mind just taking a seat? The first question is from David Ridgewell, who I believe has a handheld mic. David, please speak, although I seem to recall, when you spoke at last full council, you didn't need a mic. We could hear you in Timbuktu.
I think that's bad for an equalities trustee, though, Richard.
And sorry, can I just say, unlike Cabinet and sometimes full council, the questions are to the officers. You should have had a reply, but you have the right to make one supplementary question to the Mr. Collins or obviously Matthew, the case officer.
Yeah, I think the supplementary question really is what level of green travel plan is attached to this application? Because looking at the application, we asked a question about bus services and about the question of access, and we're not really convinced there's a proper green travel plan.
There is a travel plan attached to this application. So that was the question. Yeah.
I actually asked a question, Chair, about not just the green. I asked a question about access, such bus services, issues like that. That's not in the green travel plan. I'm sorry, I've read that through great detail last night.
I'm not quite sure how to answer that. Yeah.
So, as part of the recommendation, there is a recommendation for a travel plan. So, those other aspects would have to be factored into that before they were approved.
So, I think you've had your answer there, David. Can I call Andrew Patton, who's got his second question? Andrew, if you make your way to the central mic. So again, you should have had a copy of the officer's reply. If you wish to ask a supplementary, please.
Thank you. I've just got the question here about what information was given to people about the zoo being listed as a community asset and the notice for sale, which only became clear to many of us on the portal for 6 months later. And I'm very sorry, but I had an IT meltdown this morning, so I've not been able to see everything, so it's really difficult.
So, sorry, is that your original? Have you repeated your original question because we provided a response?
Actually, Mr. Patton said he had an IT problem this morning, so he hasn't seen our reply.
I couldn't get stuff through. So I just wanted that answer about the information.
Are we able to summarise it?
Yes.
So sorry.
No, that's perfectly all right.
I can, while you're doing that, I can say that I have got your answer to the question on the fact that only the plans and images that were on the website were shown to the councillors and Historic England. So thank you for that. It's just the other one that I don't understand the answer to. So.
Yes, thank you. So the sort of visual modelling answer you've got that. Yes.
That's simply what was on the website.
Yeah.
But I don't understand what publicity was given to inform people that the zoo had been listed as a community asset, that alternative uses were welcome and a notice for sale had been issued. That was my question.
Yeah. So apologies. I think from what I can see before me here that. We drafted it, but it hasn't been included in the response, so we'll reissue that. But my colleague is just getting that now, so we can just briefly read that out, so at least you can hear what the response is. Apologies.
Somebody kindly printed these out for me, so I've got something, but haven't got that answer.
Okay. The community right to bid team is another team in the council who deals with these process, and they've provided the answers to your question. I'll just read those out to you. The nominating group and the owners are informed directly by email or letter. The status of the nomination is updated throughout the stages it reaches, and details are published on the public website page. This case also got a lot of press attention and publication in the Evening Post and local news programmes. The community right to bid team does not look specifically at individual proposed uses. We have to confirm it was/is a community asset and agree that it could be used as a future community asset. So the community right to bid team does not look specifically at individual proposed uses, they have to confirm that it was or is a community asset and agree that it could be used as a future community asset. The web page was updated more or less the same day that the notice of sale was issued to the owners. Again, the nominators were informed of this by letter or email, and it was put on the public web page at the same time.
And so that notice for sale, forgive me on this, that was I could only ever see it on the portal on January the 6th, is that right?
On the planning portal, that might be. Yeah, it's a separate process, so the community right to bid team have a separate web page and deal with that separately.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. The third question is from Ian Boyd. Ian?
Thank you, Chair. We noted that Committee A members have had the opportunity to be shown the zoo site.
Sorry, Ian. This is your question.
Is that not what you wanted?
Do you so the point is, do you have a supplementary based on the officer reply?
Yes, the question is, the reply we had was that the meetings were entirely informal and not noted. And the question would be, has that always been the case, or is that just the case in this situation?
Yes, so with many major planning applications that both committees deal with, we follow a very similar process in that applicants are invited to provide a briefing to members, with officers facilitate that. We manage it really carefully, and there's always a clear message to everyone involved that there's no predetermination involved or debate on the issues. It's very much giving of information and asking questions. And so it is typical for a major development within the city to be subject to briefings of that nature, and also for a site visit ahead of the meeting. So it is very typical of this kind of application.
And are you confident that doesn't affect predetermination in any way?
I think you technically only supposed to have one supplementary question, but absolutely yes, because officers are there, and obviously if there's any sign of predetermination, we would step in. But members here, we say this every single time at the briefings, so it's largely for the purposes of the developers and their agents that my first words at those briefings, or whoever else is chairing them, is that the purpose of the briefing, and we specifically say that anyone participating has to stay well away from any predetermination.
Thank you. I just note that in your own directions to councillors, it's noted these presentations are a form of lobbying.
To be fair, I think I've allowed you in the previous questions a bit of latitude. Technically, you should only ask one supplementary question, but for clarity, I was happy for a supplementary, as it were. Shall we now move on to statements received? If I could urge people again just to summarise in a minute, please. We read your written reports. Technically, also, we should include the questions in the 30 minutes, but I want to maximise hearing from the public, so we'll actually start the 30 minutes from now. So firstly, Mr. Ian Ray.
When Sir David Attenborough opened our life sciences building at the university, he said there is nothing more important in the world than the work you do here. The work is conservation and biodiversity. Bristol Zoo Gardens is a unique heritage asset. It can be reimagined to become a national centre for conservation. This is what the Society should have done. But instead, they want to turn a unique site that they should be protecting into a housing estate. This will destroy biodiversity, increase the carbon footprint of the city, and it is just plain wrong. Reimagining a heritage site just requires vision and courage. The Lido would have been lost to developers, but today it is part of what makes Bristol special. The gardens are the same, but at a national level. It is shocking that the Society has not openly evaluated other options, but you can ensure that it does. Please, reject this application. Bristol deserves better.
Thank you. Mr. Justin Morris, could I urge the public in the chamber, although you may sort of strongly, since we've only got 1 minute per person and we get less people in if we have clapping, it really doesn't help in a way. So can I urge you to desist? Mr. Morris.
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors. I understand that closing the gardens has provoked strong feelings. People love the zoo and they love the gardens. But we have worked respectfully with the community, staff, officers and statutory bodies on what I think actually will be held up as an exemplar scheme. That, of course, includes opening up the much treasured gardens so everyone can visit for free. Our legacy really matters to us, so rather than apply for an outline application, we've gone into great detail so that you'll know exactly what you'll get. We're not washing our hands as we leave the site, but will remain a key partner in managing the community activities, including the Clifton Conservation Hub. I profoundly disagree with those seeking to block our proposal. If people really care about the zoo gardens, they should support our plan with its profound benefits for people and nature. And if they really care about wildlife conservation and engaging the next generation of conservationists, they should visit our new Bristol Zoo and be part of our journey to save wildlife together. Thank you.
Thank you. Bob Jory.
Good afternoon, councillors. I was born in Clifton, where I've lived, I was educated, and I've worked in Clifton for most of my life. I want to counter the false impression objectors are giving to that everyone in Clifton opposes the zoo plans. I've been very uncomfortable with their misleading campaign, which makes you think that Clifton residents are NIMBYs, and I want to put the record straight. In my opinion, there are many real benefits to this proposal, not least a reduction in traffic, restoring historic buildings, giving the free access to the gardens, new affordable homes, and the new community facilities. It'll enable the new Bristol Zoo and the worldwide conservation to continue, something close to my heart. And it'll add an even better tourist attraction. Visiting big animals always bothered me on the small site, and the world has changed, and it's now no problem for us all to nip up the road and see the huge new Bristol Zoo where the animals have so much more room to roam. I applaud this application and please support it.
Thank you. Catherine Davis.
Good afternoon, councillors. Along with many of Bristol's major visitor attractions, Visit West fully supports the zoo's plan to redevelop its Clifton site and invest in the Bristol Zoo project. While the small Clifton site has been home to the zoo for 185 years, the proposal to redevelop the site with all its constraints as an international visitor centre has been carefully considered. It's clear to anyone with the experience of challenges of running a tourist attraction that this is the wrong site in the wrong place. We ask you to get behind the West of England's wonderful tourism sector, which employs more than 45,000 people, and support the Bristol Zoological Society's plans to create a truly 21st century zoo. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna Stevens.
Good afternoon, councillors. The Avon Gorge and Downs Wildlife Project fully supports this proposal. Working with our dedicated volunteers, we deliver an amazing engagement programme for schools, community groups and the general public. For some time, we have struggled to bring groups to the Downs, as we've had nowhere for them to meet, to gather, to have lunch or a cup of tea, or even go to the toilet. As part of the zoo's proposals, the current main entrance building will become the new conservation hub and a long-awaited permanent base for the wildlife project. The hub will provide a much-needed space for everyone in Bristol to meet, engage with, learn about and treasure the amazing array of biodiversity that we have literally on our doorstep here. In approving this application, you will be directly helping our community support our precious biodiversity. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. George Cuvas.
Good afternoon, councillors. As a young person living in Bristol, I fully support this application. The Society doesn't just run a zoo, it's also effectively a university. I am one of about 300 young people studying zoology and conservation courses the zoo runs in partnership with local universities. I love wild animals, and my ambition is to become an animal keeper, and the zoo is giving me the training that I need. However, the training facilities in Clifton are limited. The new Bristol Zoo will bring a huge new investment, doubling the number of student places from 300 a year to 600. That means so many more young people will be given a chance to pursue their passion. The move to the new Bristol Zoo will allow the Society to start training the conservation leaders of tomorrow at a time when that leadership has never been more greatly needed. Thank you.
Christopher Jeffries.
I'm speaking on behalf of the Clifton and Hotwells Improvement Society, which strongly opposes this scheme. I want to stress 2 points. First, Bristol City Council has a legal duty to preserve or enhance the conservation area, which these proposals, which involve prominent blocks of flats dominating and overpowering the neighbouring streets, would permanently alter and damage. They are entirely antithetical to the surrounding architectural landscape. Second, the proposals fly in the face of the revisions to the NPPF, which make it clear that developments which are not well designed or which would lead to a significant change in the character of the existing areas should be refused. Thank you.
Thank you. Mark Ashland.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. You will have seen my statement, which is fairly technical, relating to biodiversity net gain. Paragraph 180C of the NPPF says that plans should aim to achieve measurable net gain. We demonstrate that the applicant's biodiversity net gain calculation is based on a flawed formula and cannot possibly achieve BNG in a positive sense. Our calculation shows there will be a net loss of biodiversity net gain. If I could just add one other thing. I understand that it is proposed that conditions be delegated to an officer. However, given the seriousness and the importance of the conditions, I would invite this committee to consider that whilst an officer may negotiate the conditions, those ought to come back to this committee for approval, particularly as they relate to the question of public access to the site if you grant permission. Thank you.
Richard Pedler.
Good afternoon, Councillor. I'm the founder of Richard Pedler Architects. As conservation consultants, we have been involved in rethinking the future of many heritage sites in Bristol, including the observatory on Clifton Down. The Bristol Zoo site has a rich, multi-layered heritage and this must be addressed. So what is its intrinsic character? There is a significant perimeter wall, which means the site is not overlooked. It is free from cars and vans. It is a safe space, where people and nature flourish. If the perimeter walls are breached, the integrity of the asset is lost. Proposed housing and vehicular access undermine the significance of this historic amenity. I urge you to reimagine how this unique place might continue to inspire present and future generations. Thank you.
Jeff Collard. Again, could I just encourage the public gallery? They may feel strongly in support of the statements they hear or against, but if we have further applause also, that delays statements, so we've only got 30 minutes for these, so please be desist if you can. Jeff.
Good afternoon, councillors. This proposal, this application is fundamentally flawed. The first thing is I ask the question why, after 185 years of the Bristol Zoo site operating for the benefit of the public of Bristol, is it suddenly urgent that it is needed to be sold? It is actually always, even in recent years, right the way through until 2020 and 2021, which were the years of the pandemic when the zoo had to close, it has actually been in profit, not as the developers would lead people to believe. And they use the example of 2021 as the reason why when the zoo was losing money, which it was, but that was because the zoo had to close because of the pandemic. Now, this application contravenes both policy in the Bristol local plan and Bristol City Council's local plan, particularly parts on affordable, 5 on affordable housing, because actually Clifton Ward, it should, according to the Bristol City Plan itself, should have 40% of affordable housing if it was going to do that. But in any case, you question the value of having affordable housing.
Jeff, could you kindly bring your statement to a close now, thanks?
Pardon?
You've got 1 minute. You've exceeded your 1 minute.
Yes, thank you.
So, sorry, I wasn't inviting you to continue. Everyone else has kept theirs to 1 minute. Could we have the next person now? Chris Bowie, please.
Good afternoon, councillors. I am a shareholder and vice chair of the trustees of Bristol Zoological Society. Please let me assure you that the decision to close the zoo gardens was not taken lightly. Our financial situation factually has been deteriorating year on year, with a 35% decline in visitor numbers between 1999 and 2019. To address this clearly unsustainable situation and animal welfare issues, we needed to look not nostalgically to the past, but to the future. Our strategy has been supported by independent professional advisors, every conservation zoo in the country, plus European and global zoo federations. Our new Bristol Zoo project site, which is 11 times larger than the zoo gardens, will provide habitats and spaces the animals need and allow us to broaden and deepen and expand our conservation work locally, nationally and globally. Only by making this move can we be financially sustainable. Excuse me. And I ask you to please support your officer's recommendation and approve our application and help us save wildlife together. Thank you.
Thanks. Francesca Fryer.
Good afternoon, councillors. I'd just like to say in summary, this proposal embraces the future that we face whilst valuing our past. Our proposal not only conserves the historic zoo gardens, but protects, restores and enhances them, and importantly, provides a sustainable funding model for their long-term future. Many of the existing buildings will be carefully refurbished. The highly sustainable new homes will sit discreetly inside the old wall or among the historic buildings, leaving as much space as possible for the garden. In fact, only 1/5 of the site will actually have buildings and footprints on it. The landscape design conserves the qualities and features that made the garden so special, with 36% biodiversity net gain, protection of existing trees, and planting of at least 470 new ones. In short, our proposals are good for people, they're good for nature, and good for Bristol. Please support our plans to conserve the treasured gardens for future generations of Bristolians and to deliver much-needed sustainable homes.
Thank you. Jerry Swarbrick, please.
I am chair of the neighbourhood forum that spans the communities of Clifton, Clifton Down, Hotwells and Harborside, an area from Brunel's famous SS Great Britain up to the Downs. My role has been to encourage debate on the future of the zoo, and I have a duty here to relay some key headlines. Some members of the neighbourhood support this application. However, a far larger majority are confident there are better alternatives. The Society has not engaged in an open and objective dialogue with the Bristol community, properly weighing up all the viable options. The zoo is an icon of the cultural wealth of Bristol, just like Brunel's ship, his bridge and his railway. The Society has shown insufficient regard to this heritage. Bristol Zoo Gardens belongs to the city of Bristol, and Bristol Zoo Gardens belongs in the city of Bristol. The application should be refused to allow proper public debate to choose a better future for the Zoo Gardens in Bristol.
Jerome Thomas.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, councillors. We know it's fairly common practice that a developer's initial proposals are excessive and that they get the balance wrong between the developer benefit and the community benefit. And this is what the officer's report states. The proposal's scale and massing means the proposal cannot be considered to be well designed in the context of the National Planning Policy Framework and suggests the proposal should be refused. It's very clear. Reducing the scale and massing of this development is essential. It will retain more of the character of the community heritage of Bristol Zoo Gardens, as would reducing the number of car parking spaces, which seems completely inappropriate for developing modern times. I ask that the Development Control Committee members please reject this proposal and that the developers return with a more appropriate application.
Councillor Grant. Katie, if you could actually address that Councillor O'Rourke's statement first, and then while you're up, you might as well do yours at the same time.
Sorry, did you ask Richard for chair rather?
Could you do the one on behalf of Councillor O'Rourke, and then while you're up, actually do your own?
Sure thing. I hope I'm getting 2 minutes in that case.
You are indeed.
Thank you very much, Chair. Councillors, I'm reading now on behalf of Councillor Paul O'Rourke. I'm sorry not to be in attendance today, but I have a pre-booked Lord Mayor engagement, which means I'm out of the city. I presume you have all read my statement, and I would just like to summarise here briefly. There is a lot to like in the design of the scheme, and I do think we should consider a residential scheme on the site and one which supports the maintenance of the gardens for public access. However, I have challenged the zoo on their formula for the management plan and believe that they have reached the quantum of 196 without considering alternative ways to pay for the upkeep of the gardens. They could endow a fund to help maintain the site, which would mean fewer units and reduce the harm to the historic context. This would mean that the massing would be reduced, which is what residents want and is supported by our own urban design team. I do not think that the local context is being given sufficient weight. Massing and quantum breaches our own policies DM26 and DM27. The terraces need to be broken up to give a more villa-style appearance. I think the proposal should be refused and the zoo should come back with an altered design. My own statement is as follows. Most endings are not happy endings, and the closure of the zoo site in Clifton is a truly sad and poignant moment in local history. I think the Zoological Society have done a lot of work to consult the public on their plans and designs, and I see it in the absence of an actual alternative offer on the site that value that some housing inside the walls will bring is necessary for the maintenance of the gardens that are so loved. Let us also not forget that we are in a housing crisis in Bristol. However, I have objected to the proposal in its current form because I want to see 24-hour public access to make sure that this site belongs to all of us and does not feel like a closed housing development. I would like a stronger, bolder and clearer structure to manage the green space and to ensure an enduring community voice in its use and protection. Finally, on sustainability, I think the days of incremental change are gone. A conservation society like the zoo should be building for a net zero world using construction materials and methods that set precedents for the whole city.
Thanks. George Ferguson.
Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I speak as a Bristol grandfather, principally, and a zoo shareholder, and I feel deeply betrayed by the management and trustees of the zoo, who have conspired to dismiss viable alternatives, two of which I know have been subject of pre-planning applications and received positive responses. Make no mistake, this is the result of a mother and father of a Bristol establishment stitch-up, and I should know. And you're the last chance for Bristol to stick to its ecological principles and put yourself on the right side of history, because We will be laughed at from outside this city if we approve this dire application. And I say that as an architect with a passion for this city. It will be ugly, it will be inappropriate, and it will provide a derisory contribution to our affordable housing need. Thank you.
Georgina Harford, sorry. Oh, sorry, Ian. Sorry, do you mind just, well, you're there now, so we'll swap. So you go ahead and then Ian speaks.
Thank you, Chair. I object to this planning application on the matter of building design. The disproportionate scale, density, and resulting bleakness of these buildings are a travesty of the trust that has been put in the hands of the applicant. It is noted that the architects, Pennor and Vassall, are now merged into an enormous international business, far removed from the beloved idiosyncratic zoological gardens of Bristol. The city is already burdened by much poor buildings design from the 1960s. This specific site is the right place for top quality housing design. Anything less will be a shame on the city. Thank you.
Thanks. Ian Boyd, and apologies for the mistake.
Thank you, Chair. The cultural importance and history of this very old site has been trivialised by dismissing it as a brownfield ripe for development and treating the listed buildings as no more than follies. When the NPPF was published in 2012, it was described as a developer's charter. It's far too easy for schemes to pass on the basis that they cause less than substantial harm. I strongly disagree with that assessment, and it isn't outweighed by the claimed public benefits, which are illusory. The zoo gardens are a unique sanctuary. They would be transformed completely in look and feel, and not for the better. Now, in wartime, the deliberate destruction of cultural property is a war crime. But in peacetime, we let our historic environment be chipped away at until all cities look the same, tedious, inhumane, and rarely blessed with good architecture. This scheme sets no high standards, and like almost all schemes, is purely motivated financially. This kind of loss of things of interest and value to the mundane and short-term doesn't go without notice. Liverpool has lost its World Heritage status, and Bath teeters on the brink.
Ian, could I bring you to a close, please?
The commercial overdevelopment of historic areas.
I would suggest you ought to consider a career in politics because you like your cake and eating it. David Ridgewell. David.
David Ridgewell, Bristol District Equalities Forum and a trustee. We have concerns about the application. The level of disabled accessible housing we feel is still too small. The level of fully accessible M standard housing, which we work with the city to develop in the local plan and recently had meetings on, still nowhere near the standard that we would want. We also feel that the zoo's certainly not produced a green travel plan. That is not there, and there's certainly no links to their new site. Their new site is totally car dependent. For a zoological society, it's totally car dependent in South Gloucestershire. There's no bus service like there is to the one now. And also, to imagine that tourism is suddenly going to switch to South Gloucestershire, let's be fair, the tourism is the Downs, the bridge, and what people come to see the gorge. So people will still come there, but we think the actual garden facilities are quite poor in the sense there's no cafes, toilets, and people will still visit the site. So I think some of this is pretty poorly designed. And as an organisation, we were looking at the access, and we just like to see much more and a better design, really, I think, before we go forward, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, David. Susan Carter.
Thank you, Chair. Downs for People campaigned against zoo parking on the Downs. Planning committees proved powerless to stop this, though some tried. You, O Committee, are similarly powerless to guarantee public access to the zoo's gardens. Section 106 agreements and planning conditions are as far as you can go. Conditions can be removed by the committees that follow you, just like time limits on zoo parking. The zoo obtained 7 supposedly temporary permissions. It was the statutory Protection of the Downs Act that ended zoo parking. It is statutory measures that are needed if access to the zoo's gardens is to be guaranteed. The zoo knows this, but is not taking action to dedicate or designate its land. You can't insist it does. What you can do is ignore its access claims because it hasn't dedicated or designated. Agreements depend on enforcement by the zoo, a small interest group, or future planning committees will not do. The public needs statutory measures that will last and which can be enforced through the courts. Thank you.
Thanks. Adam Chivers.
There have been a vast number of objections. Everyone objects to the 4 6-storey blocks which are wholly out of character with the surrounding neighbourhood. Clearly the case officer himself agrees. His conclusion could not be more clear. It's at page 138. The development cannot be considered to be well designed. Now the National Planning Policy Framework is abundantly clear at paragraph 134 that development that is not well designed should be refused. Paragraph 134 is mandatory. If the development is not well designed, the application must be refused. That is a matter of law. There is no scope for discretion or a balancing exercise. To grant permission would be unlawful.
Thank you. John Hatton.
Good afternoon. I'm representing Avon Niche Trees. We're a Bristol-based charity fundraising to buy and create new woodlands in the Bristol-Avon catchment area. In the last 3 seasons, we've planted more than 35,000 trees. It's likely that hundreds of tons of carbon are safely stored in the proposed trees for felling at Bristol Zoo Garden. Even if twice those number of trees were replanted, it would take decades and decades to store the equivalent amount of carbon. Certainly very little by 2030, when Bristol aims to reach net zero. Bristol was the first council in the country to declare a climate emergency. If this committee passes this application today, then Bristol City Council will be effectively reversing that climate emergency declaration. I urge you to oppose this felling. Thank you.
Thank you. Dominic Hogg.
I've never read War and Peace, but thanks, Matthew, for the warm-up. You didn't need it to be that long, as my colleague Adam Chivers has said. You didn't need to go to the balancing exercise. Once you had said that this was not well designed, you should have recommended refusal of the application. You then go to a balancing exercise. You look to show, somehow or other...
Sorry, could I just actually remind you, this isn't personal. It's not actually one particular officer's report. They may front it, but it's actually the council itself. Sorry, over to you.
30 seconds. Thank you.
You can, actually.
Thank you. You didn't need to do the balancing exercise, but you did it anyway, the council, and you've argued that in swapping the harm, you're going to secure a public benefit associated with the access to the site. You're not going to do that, as others have said, because the only way you would do it is through law and through a capital sum being placed in an escrow account or similar. And you can do that, and you can then have both the benefit and the diminished harm and the better design. Finally, look at the Secretary of State letter to all council leaders of December 2022 saying that basically housing numbers are no reason to be not refusing development that is not well designed. Take the lawful decision and refuse this application.
Alistair Sorday. Alistair Sorday.
Nearly 10,000 petition signatures, nearly 1,000 objections. This is no small matter. We all know in our hearts that we're talking about something which is ugly, is unsustainable, it's inappropriate for a conservation zone, and it's not affordable. 31 one-person flats for 250,000. This is a Joni Mitchell moment. You don't know what you've got till it's gone. Paradise will be paved over. This massive inquiry is all about this, all to raise money for a once noble institution which is leaving Bristol. I was once chair of the Bristol Green Capital Partnership. We were so proud of our city. Let us not let a handful of trustees in one institution take Bristol backwards.
Clifton College, Clifton College.
Good afternoon, councillors. The impact on the school of what is proposed will sadly be immeasurable. The size, the scale, the design of what is suggested are completely out of keeping with the wonderful heritage buildings that we are so very proud to look after. The protected views from the college, along with so many trees, gone forever. But what we are most concerned about today is the impact on the lives of our pupils. The road that our pupils constantly cross between lessons have very few vehicles. With this development, we will see a sharp increase in traffic, and pupil safety doesn't seem to have been considered. We know that some of our younger pupils do not feel comfortable if people look into the playground. How will they feel when they are overlooked by ranks of apartments? Worse still, what impact on the well-being of our boarders, with their homes and living spaces overlooked? For a boarder, the school is their home. On behalf of each and every one of these pupils now and in the future, please pause today and ask for the plans to be reconsidered, the school consulted. There is just too much at stake.
Thank you.
Listening.
Before people move, I had hoped to take more people, but the applause actually cut into the speaking time. I'm sorry, we only have I did make that plea, I made that clear, but you actually chose by your actions to actually eliminate people's right to speak. We have, however, carefully read every statement received. Can we therefore move on to the next stage, please? The officer's report. Members may know my policy is normally only to allow 5 minutes to verbally update or summarise the officer report. Exceptionally, I'm going to allow the case officer 10 minutes. I can assure you, just in case you feared that was the case, your chairman is not going dangerously liberal, but it is a major application and, in my view, deserves proper assessment and scrutiny. Matthew.
Good afternoon, members. So the application for full planning permission is a residential-led redevelopment of the site with community... So the application's before you. The full application proposes a residential-led redevelopment of the site with community floor space and publicly accessible open space. And there's also the application for listed building consent, which concerns the works to the 6 listed buildings at the site. As the committee reports comprehensively address all relevant matters, this presentation will focus on the key issues. The presentation cannot include every plan, but together with the plans appended to the committee reports, a comprehensive representation of the development has been provided. The site is designated as important open space and is a locally listed historic park and garden. There are approximately 30 TPA trees at the site and 6 listed...
Could I suggest members don't catcall out? the mics are working perfectly well here, but sometimes if you sit too far back, you can't make clear communication. So Matthew, would you mind just moving forward?
Yep. This is the best I can really do? Is it okay?
Yeah.
Do you want me to start again? Or?
No,
okay.
Go on.
So, as I said, there are 6 Grade 2 listed buildings at the site, and there's also listed buildings within the vicinity of the site, which are those in gold and orange colour. The light blue ones are locally listed. The site is also within a conservation area. As has been explained in detail in the report, the applications have received a significant number of objections, including from statutory consultees. I won't repeat those here. Since the publication of the report, the comments received have been included within the amendment sheet and have been responded to by officers. Further comments have also been received since the publication of the amendment sheet, but they do not raise any matters which have not been addressed within the reports. Here's a proposed master plan of the development. The majority of the development is pushed to the site's edges. As well as that, there are also these lake houses within the inner site. As well as retaining the historic buildings at the site, the proposal retains historic features such as the Grand Terrace and East Lawn, as well as a reconfigured lake. Key historic buildings will mostly be converted into residential uses, albeit the entrance lodge will be converted into a community mixed-use building, and the Bear Pit, Monkey Temple and Bird Aviary will be incorporated as publicly accessible landscape features. The residential aspects of the development are contrary to open space policies BCS 9 and DM 17. However, there is justification for the residential proposals, largely as they will facilitate the long-term management of the site, including the provision of free public access to the site for the first time in its history, as the management of the site's publicly accessible areas would primarily be funded by an estate service charge, which will be secured by Section 106 agreement. The plans on the left shows the areas of the zoo where visitors could access, where visitor access was restricted or denied, and the plan on the right indicates the areas of the proposal where the public will be able to gain access. It evidences that the development will allow for greater public access to a larger proportion of the site than was available when the zoo was open. Whilst the proposal will deliver a materially different form of open space compared to the existing zoo, it will nevertheless deliver high quality open spaces that will be activated through free public access. And for these reasons, we believe that the positive weight associated with that will outweigh the negative weight associated with policies BCS 9 and DM 17. Here's a plan of the Clifton Conservation Hub's floor plan. The zoo provides community facilities currently. However, the development meets the relevant policies which seek to protect community uses, as there is appropriate alternative zoo provision in the region. Further, those more local, community-orientated aspects of the zoo, such as its open space, events venues, and meeting space for the community, will be re-provided at the site. This is an access strategy plan. The development will introduce traffic to the site, which is necessary for the residential uses. It is, however, harmful to the site's heritage and open space value, albeit it is partially mitigated through various measures, as is explained in the report. 40 affordable homes are proposed. Whilst this does not meet policy BCS 17's 40% target, the proposal does accord with the fast-track approach set out within the Affordable Housing Practice Note, where the applicant has committed to commence development within 18 months of permission being granted, and a viability testing process if the development does not commence within that time period. The weight associated with achieving the early delivery of the development and its affordable housing in this case outweighs the need for full compliance with the policy. A significant number of trees are proposed to be felled to facilitate the development. The arboricultural team has raised no objection to this, suggesting the retained trees are those of the highest amenity value and appropriate replacement trees is proposed. The development will not unacceptably impact nature conservation at the site, and we have had evidence that the development will achieve a biodiversity net gain. The proposal also meets relevant sustainability policies. This is an existing and proposed view of the northern block. The proposal will harm the significance of the Grade 2 listed entrance lodge buildings, where their significance includes their visual dominance in the landscape. Here's another view of the northern block. The Townscape Visual Impact Assessment explains that the site is not visible from the elevated landscape of the Downs Plateau due to the Downs' topography and existing trees. This is evident from the sections included on the plan on the slide. However, the Townscape Visual Impact Assessment does explain that very occasional glimpses of a northern block may be available in winter, as well as some of the more informal footpaths within the trees as the Downs rises to the north from Clifton Down Road. Here's a view from the East Lawn. Here's a view from the junction at Clifton Down and Northcote Road.
Sorry, Matthew. Could I ask people that we've now moved from public forum into the committee, which is purely for members and officers? If people actually intrude, you're actually stopping us performing our democratic function of proper scrutiny. So could I please ask you to desist? Matthew.
So here's a view of the proposal along Northcote Road. So you've got Block E1 here, the clock tower, Block E2 and Block E3. The scale and heights of these blocks will have some undesirable impacts on neighbours, most of which are Clifton Schools buildings, including numbers 7 to 10 Northcote Road, the Hornbury Arts Building and Paul's House. As is explained in the report, these impacts are not considered to be a reason to refuse the application due to a number of factors, including the severity of the impact, the respective uses of the buildings, and the need to effectively develop the site. This is Block E1 again. Block E1's height is fairly consistent with Tate's House, which addresses Clifton Down, but is significantly taller than number 10 Northcote Road, and around 1 story taller than the Clifton Schools Preparatory School, which is here. This is Block E2. Block E2 is 1.5 to 2 stories greater than number 7 and 8 Northcote Road, which is this building, and the Hornbury Arts Centre, which you can see here. Block E2 is more consistent with numbers 3 to 6 Northcote Road, which is here, and won't unacceptably impact their impact, given there's only their amenity, given there's only over 22 metres between them, and whilst taller, the block's end section does break down in mass, which will provide greater relief to the residents of numbers 3 to 6 Northcote Road. This is Block E3. Block E3 is approximately 1 story taller than Paul's House and numbers 1 to 2 Northcote Road, albeit the block's impact is mitigated in part through being set back from the road, which provides generous separation distances, and the block's design, which sets back its 5th story. This is a view along Guthrie Road. You can see this is Block E3, this is Block S1, and what you can see here is one of the lake houses located further back into the site. Here's another view of Block S1. So Clifton College's South Town building is this building here, and shown here of a section with Block S1. It's a day house. The block would harmfully reduce the level of outlook and daylight that the South Townhouse currently enjoys, and this is explained in the report as well as the justification for these impacts. And whilst the block will be 2 stories greater than the South Town building, its height is not that dissimilar to existing buildings in the area, such as Watson's House. This is a view along College Road, where we think the impact is generally acceptable. These are the West houses, which are on College Road. Here's just some sample elevations of the lake houses within the site. And here's a view from within the site. That's the bird aviary on the left, and on the right is one of the lake houses. This extract shows key views within the conservation area as set out within the character appraisal. The large perimeter blocks will differ from the established character and will not preserve or enhance the character and appearance of the conservation area. This will be particularly evident when viewing the northern block from Clifton Down Road, albeit we acknowledge that the existing trees will soften the block's impact. Similarly, Block E3 and S1 will impact the setting of a list of buildings on Guthrie Road and the conservation area, particularly when looking west along Guthrie Road, for example, from view LC26. Concerns have been expressed relating to the proposal's impact on listed buildings to the south of Guthrie Road, which address Clifton College's South Quad and playing fields, so in here. The Council's urban design team advises that only a slight, if any, impact will be visible from this side. Views of the residential dwellings within the site, particularly from Cecil Road, so this view here, is also considered harmful given the landscape is currently free from development such as homes. So the development does pose a less than substantial harm to the setting of a number of heritage assets, predominantly due to the change of use resulting from the loss of the existing zoo. Albeit the zoo has closed, the quantity of residential development and its scale and massing at the perimeter of the site. The applicant has provided clear and convincing justification for this harm. In relation to the loss of a zoological use, the proposal ensures that the site will retain a communal value to Bristol, as whilst the meaning of the place to visitors will change, the site will continue to offer access to members of the public. The applicant suggests the number of homes are necessary to enable a sufficient recurring income to fund the management and maintenance of the publicly accessible gardens and spaces, and to sustain the heritage assets in the long term. On balance, we find that the development's public benefits outweighs the identified harm. So the development is not in accordance with the development plan, and it is contrary to policies including open space, heritage and urban design. However, there are material considerations that indicate that a decision other than in accordance with the development plan should be reached. The development has many benefits, principally the provision of free access to the proposed high-quality open spaces, the delivery of 196 homes, 40 of which will be affordable, and heritage-related benefits, including ensuring the long-term conservation of all heritage assets within the site. Further, the Council cannot demonstrate a 5-year supply of deliverable homes, and in these circumstances the MPPF advises that planning permission should be granted unless any adverse impacts of doing so will significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the MPPF taken as a whole. Our judgment is that the adverse impacts of the development, including its non-conformity of the development plan, fails to significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits of granting permission. So accordingly, on balance, there are sufficient material considerations to indicate that the application should be approved. Hence, the planning application is recommended for approval, subject to conditions in section 106, in accordance with the committee report, and the application for listed building consent is also recommended for approval, subject to conditions as set out in the committee reports.
Thank you, Matthew. Allowing for the two interventions, you didn't actually exceed your allotted 10 minutes, so the chairman won't shoot you afterwards. We'll now move on to members' questions. I've got two arising from the public forum. Firstly, Mark Ashdown from the Tree Forum raised the methodology related to the biodiversity net gain. Are you able to clarify that, please?
Yes, so at the time of the preparation and submission of the application, biodiversity, so I should probably just start by explaining biodiversity net gain. The tools to help assess whether there will be a net gain have been issued by Natural England in the forms of metrics. At the time of the submission of the application, the preparatory work for the application, metric 3.0 was in place and issued by Natural England. So the applicant has used that metric. Since then, new metrics have been published, including 3.1 and 4.0. Natural England's guidance is that it's up to the consenting authority to decide which metric the applicant uses, but during the project, their advice is to not change metrics unless specifically asked to. There's no legislative requirement on the applicant to use a specific metric, and as well as that, when the metrics were updated, the changes which were discussed suggest that the same approach has been taken for the metrics, albeit parts of the metric have been updated. So overall, we're confident, and the Nature Conservation Officer is confident as well, that the metric is appropriate and representative, so we can rely on the figures provided by the applicant, which suggests a biodiversity net gain.
Thank you for that, Matthew. My other question relates to the submission by the headmaster of Clifton College. Obviously, well be for members to judge about the the North Coast Road elevation and the massing and design, but my particular issue was about transport and road safety, and perhaps I can ask Pip what our view is of that assessment.
Thank you, Chair. We take this issue about road safety, especially when children are involved, very, very seriously, and our duty of care on the highway makes me pay a particular attention. I've worked with the applicant since I started in the council last year on this scheme, and we got to an agreement that they extended their extent of works for the Section 278 agreement with me, so that any extra works required for road safety purposes would be included in that, which is actually a much more efficient way of ensuring that happens. To belt and brace that, I have got them to agree that independent road safety audits will be carried out during the whole of that project, and we will agree whether extra interventions are needed on the results of that road safety audit. I do believe that that is an efficient way to ensure that happens. To back that up, the travel plan contributions, we've agreed that they should focus on road safety with children, either the new children on the application site or the existing very important lives of the children attending the schools and living in the area. So the exact details of how that will be would again be dependent on what the safety audits draw as key attentions. Would it be curbside craft teaching, cycle training? There could be plenty of options to make sure that both the safety of pupils and the children of residents as well as adults will be, there is plenty of opportunity for that to be dealt with. Is that okay?
That's fine. Councillor Varney and then Councillor Gita.
Thank you, Chairman. You've taken my first two questions, but that is your privilege as Chairman, so that's quite all right. I've just got a couple of questions. Matthew, thank you very much for the report. It took a lot of reading, but I think it was very thorough, so thank you very much indeed. Obviously, the application site is surrounded almost on 3 sites by Clifton College. And, you know, from a safeguarding point of view, I think their concerns of overlooking are very legitimate. And could you just expand upon what measures have been taken to avoid any kind of overlooking into sort of sensitive areas in the college itself?
I'll just go back to these slides. So these section plans have been requested to help assess that impact. In this case, you can see here that these angled windows, which will be angled and obscured to still allow for outlook, but to prevent harmful overlooking, have been incorporated. This distance is considered acceptable. Here again, so you can see that for most of this, this is like an access walkway. And from here, it's just a hallway. And then you look in here, sorry, bear with me. The window's actually here, so the angle of view will prevent harmful overlooking, likewise here. And this plan shows that if you were standing up here, the angle wouldn't allow harmful overlooking. And this, in terms of Paul's house, which is probably one of the more sensitive Clifton College buildings as it is a dormitory, the distance between the proposed accommodation is 24 or over 24 metres. So that would suggest that their privacy would be maintained. This is the section plan between Block S1 and the South Towns building. So this has a decked access arrangement. So the overlooking, if it would occur from within the buildings, and we consider that the distance, combined with the intervening features, means that, and the nature of this building's windows, which you can see here, means that privacy won't be unacceptably harmed.
So basically, the angled windows and the use of opaque glass will ensure, and the distances will ensure there will be no overlooking of any kind whatsoever.
Yeah, and the layouts of the blocks themselves, in terms of which rooms will be facing the college in places as well.
Thank you very much. If I could just move on to the Section 106 agreement for the public access. It's been suggested that that is not robust enough, and that at some point in the future public access could be removed. Obviously that's the key selling point of this scheme, that we have a public access, free access in perpetuity. Are you confident that Section 106 is robust enough to achieve that?
It's probably best we refer to a legal officer to answer that question.
Thank you, Chair. The short answer is yes. A Section 106 obligation is entirely capable of being a robust means of securing public access. The reason that the report is phrased in the way it is because in principle and in theory there is the potential for Section 106 obligations to be modified or discharged in the future, either by agreement between the local planning authority and the landowner or via a formal application which can be appealed. So the qualified wording in your officer report is purely a reflection of the statutory position, but the crucial test in terms of whether an obligation can be set aside or maintained in the future is whether it continues to serve a planning purpose. Now, in the application you're dealing with now, you have a clear situation where public access is a central plank of the application, and it's the principal benefit which you're being asked to refer to when weighing up the benefits and disbenefits of the scheme. So if you're weighing that up, you might come to the conclusion that there is a very limited prospect indeed of that obligation not being regarded as serving a planning purpose in the future. And one of the speakers earlier referred to Section 106 as being inferior to a statutory measure and not enforceable in the courts. Well, Section 106 is a statutory measure because it's Section 106 of the Town and Country Planning Act 1990, and planning obligations are enforceable in the courts, because if there is a breach, then the local planning authority can take the person responsible through civil proceedings to secure either an injunction or an order forcing them to observe the requirements of the 106. So with all that in mind, I'm content that Section 106 offers a robust mechanism in this context.
Councillor Gita.
Thank you, Chairman. So I was just looking at the design being contrary to policies DM26 and DM27, and the two offsets for me were, one, the public access, which has been very well answered, so thank you very much. But the second point I just wanted to go back to was the net gain on the biodiversity, which I think is over 30%, and you've given a good explanation as to why there could be another number that's been come up with based on 3.1 and 4.0. But if the over 30% was robust, surely 3.1 and 4.0, if they were used, wouldn't have a material difference in the net gain of the biodiversity. So do you have what the metric might have been, or a guide to how different that net biodiversity gain would have been if the other metrics were used? If that made any sense.
So we've taken a view together with our Nature Conservation Officer that it would be disproportionate to ask the applicant to change metrics partway through a project, or 4.0 was only issued in March or April this year. So we don't know what the material difference would be from that. But, as I explained earlier, we've acted in accordance with the guidance. We've reached our decision in consultation with our Nature Conservation Officer. So we feel that we've provided you with robust advice in that manner.
Sure, thank you. The only thing I was trying to get at was if maybe you could tell me what 4.0 is then, just so maybe I could make a judgment call as to how much different a biodiversity net gain might change by using number 4. So I certainly don't expect you to give me a number because you've complied with the rules that are in place, but maybe an explanation as to what 3.1 and 4 are?
Mr. Collins.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I don't think we could give you a reasonable guide one way or the other. As we've said, the metric 4.0 came out 3 or 4 weeks ago. So not only is it the guidance from Natural England and government to stick to the same metric during the life of a project, so we follow that guidance, but certainly kind of 3 or 4 weeks before the determination of the application, clearly, I feel it would be unreasonable to ask the applicants to recalculate everything via the new metric. I think the metrics are so complex, although some stakeholders do really grapple with them and understand them as well. Because of their complexity, it's not possible to say or nudge it up a bit or nudge it down a bit. All that I would say that you should give weight to is that the figures there, 30-odd%, and at the moment, there is no, so the percentage requirement for BNG going forward will be 10%, but that comes into effect in October, I think it's October or November this year. So at the moment, that legal requirement does not apply, but at the moment, on the basis of everything before you, you've got a figure of at least 30% with a change in metric, unlikely to have reduced it by 20%, but even then the 10% isn't a real target for you through the legislation because it's not kind of active yet.
Thank you. And if I may indulge, just to change my question slightly, what is 4.0?
It's just a different way of calculating the sort of the future biodiversity net gain. Comparison of what's there now and what will be there going forward. It's a real complicated formula in the form of a spreadsheet that you kind of put different things in and it kind of generates a figure, a percentage. So 3.0 would end up with one figure, and that's what we've publicised in the committee report. 4.0, because it's been updated by Natural England, it's likely to generate a different figure because there's a different way of calculating it. So that's why it's not possible to say what the difference is actually going to be.
Councillor Halfway.
Thank you, and thanks for the report, Matthew. My question is about the justification for the change of use for the site and what level, whether there's a viability assessment for the existing use of the site that is scrutinised, and also about what consideration or what weighting we give to the presumed loss of economic activity by this change of use and, the zoo moving out of Bristol City Council territory. And the second part of the question was just coming back to the Section 106 agreement, just around, the application includes access between the hours of 8 and 5, I think, or 8 and a bit later in the summer months, but just what the justification was for presumably shutting off access after those times. Did it need to be gated?
So taking your last question first, the access to the site, over the course of the application, we have negotiated greater access, for example, in the summer months. The reason for not having 24/7 access was due to potential security and antisocial behaviour concerns between houses and the open spaces. In terms of the loss of economic value, we don't have policies that protect tourist attractions like this for economic purposes in this location. In terms of the viability of the existing use, Gary, I didn't know if you wanted that one or...
I think that the approach set out in the report is one that it kind of acknowledges that the zoo has closed. That, you know, we're not being asked to, you know, for permission to close the zoo. That has happened. What the decision you have to make is whether the proposals before you are acceptable, and within that there has to be a weighing up as to whether this residential redevelopment and the extent of it is acceptable. And part of that is, you know, certainly the extent, the quantum of development, and we've really had to test the applicants about this in order to give you a robust recommendation, is whether the quantum of development is really necessary in order to manage this extensive piece of parkland and open space. And you know, we've really tested that, and I think, as set out in the report, we feel that it does add up, that quantum is necessary. So that's the kind of the element of kind of viability that's been tested during the application, and it'd be valid if members felt that, you know, they rejected those figures for whatever reason, that there was too much development going on and that the extent of residential development was too much, then it would be valid to kind of, you know, challenge the recommendation we've given you. But I think a lot of information has been provided and been assessed, and I think it's that element of viability, you know, what's the justification for the type and quantum of development. That's the question before you, rather than, you know, it was the business plan for the zoo correct in closing and relocating to Wild Place. So that's my advice on that point.
Just to come back on that, obviously, if a pub closes down and someone wants to change a pub into a residential development, we have quite an extensive viability assessment process for that. Are you saying there's no similar type process for the zoo?
That's correct, because of the nature of it, really, because when pubs close, and obviously both committees have looked at that kind of issue for a number of years now, it's we've got a specific policy about pub closures and testing viability, because it has to be tested that, you know, there will be other pub operators out there, or there'll be other people, including community groups, who can, you know, club together and operate a public house. And sometimes that's proven that it can happen, and it has happened, and sometimes it's proven the other way, really. I think a zoo is very much at the opposite end of the scale, really. Very, very specialist, limited in number around the country, of course, and the report does address the issue around, well, is there another zoo operator who could have come in and operated this? And, you know, there was no, you know, we've said the closure, or the proposed closure of the zoo was, you know, very heavily publicised, of course, and at no point was there a kind of an approach from another zoo to kind of step in and expand their operation to this part of the country. So the kind of question comes up, but I think they're at very different ends of the scale.
Councillor Powden.
I think there's another aspect to the viability assessment, isn't there, about whether or not this is viable as an ongoing open space. So it's not just the viability of the existing business, but given that this is a designated open space, there's another viability assessment that has to be done. I noted in the comments from the Neighbourhood Forum that there's a KPMG report identifying a number of different options. So it's not just a mathematical thing, is it? It's looking at all the range of possible options that this open space could be put to use. Have any of the officers involved in this report seen that report and made an assessment of the other options? Because it is of concern that the Neighbourhood Partnership has been denied access to that. That's not my only question, Chair. I've got a few others. Sorry to revisit a few things.
So we're not aware of a KPMG report about alternative uses. Normally we would say on a development proposal, alternative proposals aren't material. In this case, because it's a very unique set of circumstances, and because there are a number of deviations from policy, which are all documented in the report, we would say it is material. It's something that you should factor in. But as members of the committee will know, material considerations, it's a two-stage approach. The first stage is it material or not? So we're saying it's material. The second and really important one is what weight should you give to it? And so we obviously have been aware of 2 pre-application submissions to us about alternative developments at the site, one from some time ago, and obviously we've responded informally as officers on that, and we've not seen an application on either, and not aware of a timescale for even an application, never mind delivery. So our advice based upon that, and it's again referred to a number of times in the report, is that within that what would be seen as a reasonable timescale, there's no alternative proposal coming forward. So that's our assessment of alternative uses of the site and our guidance as to how members should weigh that up.
Next is, it's very marked that Historic England seemed to differ from most of the other kind of heritage comments in saying that this is less than significant harm. Is this always a subjective judgment, or is Historic England's judgment kind of definitive?
I would say that probably their judgment is not definitive. However, they are, by definition, the statutory consultee on heritage matters. So whilst ourselves as local planning authority, we're not bound to completely agree or align ourselves with the Historic England assessment of less than substantial harm and the weighing up. We would say to members, or certainly as officers informing our recommendation, and we would also say to members in making the decision, you should give the Historic England assessment significant weight given their status as the heritage statutory consultee.
And what about other consultees that seem unanimously in coming to an alternative conclusion that is significant harm?
Again, it's for members to decide what weight to give. Within reasonableness, really. I would say less weight than Historic England, but there are statutory consultees amongst the groups that have commented that are actually statutory, so their views should be given weight, such as I think the Victorian Society.
National Building.
We've got it.
It's okay. I've read the report.
We've got so they're highlighted in the report, so they must be given weight.
Okay, I'm going to. I have got two more themes to explore. Please, probably 2 or 3 questions. How can we ensure it's not just the Section 106 agreement? It's the nature of the company or the nature of the body that oversees ongoing public access. I'd like to know if there's anything we can do to bump up the status of this to some form of charity or trust with obligations, rather than just being a management company where they may interpret that the object of that company is simply to maximise profit or come to a balanced financial sheet or accounting. And the second question is, so that's, I guess, a legal thing. Could we upgrade it from a company to something with more obligations, like a charity, where there's more oversight of the company itself? And the second part of this is, I haven't seen a lot about the appearance of the gating, the signage and so on, but what I fear is that the gating may be very, may not welcome people. And unless you're more or less armed with this Section 106 agreement, you'll find it very unwelcoming and very inaccessible for members of the public to visit. And I'd like to know what consideration has been given to making it accessible and welcoming for the members of the public. So there's a legal and a design question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Dealing with the legalities first, use of a management company is a recognised approach to this, because I've dealt with Section 106s in other parts of the country quite recently, involving large areas of open space on development sites, including wildlife considerations such as bats and protected species. And the crucial aspect of the 106 is to require prior approval by the local planning authority of the company objects and the financial structure of the proposed management company, and to have a barrier on development being commenced or being occupied until satisfactory arrangements A have been put forward and B have been approved. So a management company is a perfectly sound vehicle for achieving those objectives, not in relation to this case, but in terms of agreements generally, and this is often the case in highway matters. It's possible if there are concerns about long-term support financially for maintenance of public open space and preservation of access, then it's potentially possible to have financial guarantees built into the 106 to support the delivery of the planning obligations and what they require, such as a performance bond, etc. That would be the case if it was felt that the financial profile of the management company wasn't sufficiently robust to encourage full confidence in the long-term observance of the planning obligations. But the usual approach of a local planning authority would be to require a certain level of financial background to be provided by the management company from day one. So the essential point, a management company is a perfectly viable way of doing this, and Section 106 is in their standard form, can include very detailed provisions as to the status and background that a management company can have.
So I think here's a typical example of the approach that the applicants use to try and soften those entrances to be welcoming to members of the public. So, for example, they have used these animal motifs on most of the entrances. Here you can see almost like a park-like entrance, and that follows on most of the entrances around the site. When outside of the hours which it is open, the gates will be closed. There will be signage explaining that. I think we could secure details of the signage and what it says, but yeah, there is clearly a tension between feeling welcome to the site and the residential development, and the development has tried to address that through these entrances.
Thank you for your indulgence, Chair. Two more questions. One is, there's a lot made in the report of the fact that one of the benefits of this will be protecting listed structures. But isn't there a duty to protect them anyway?
There is, and when there's harm to heritage asset, you need to give that harm great weight. And likewise, when you ensure the long-term conservation of a heritage asset, you should give that great weight. So whilst it's an expectation of any successful development involving a heritage asset to ensure its long-term viability, it's nevertheless a benefit which has to be recognised.
In addition, there are heritage benefits as well that have to be taken into account. So, particularly the structures within the zoo site. So the Monkey Temple's just like there at the moment, so that will be refurbished and put in a more appropriate landscape setting. The aviary will be enhanced in terms of its appearance because it's had various additions over time, and likewise the bear pit. I mean, thankfully there hasn't been a bear pit for a very, very long time, but in terms of its heritage value, there is a character to it that the current aviary cuts across. So again, the works to that structure as well will provide heritage benefits. There are others listed in the report as well which have to be given weight.
My final question, I mean, we've heard a lot about biodiversity. I'm just surprised we didn't ask for it was within our rights to ask for a new assessment, given the marked difference between the two assessments. I'm just struggling to understand why it wasn't anticipated that this committee would be very, very interested in that, and why, given it's, as I understand it, within our rights to ask for an updated assessment, why we didn't do that.
I think it was two very good reasons for not doing so. One, it's the national guidance to stick with the same metric throughout the life of a project, so that's what we applied here. And secondly, metric 4 came out, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago, So, I think if we said to any applicant to kind of change their methodology in assessing anything, that have a knock-on effect on the timescale for determination of the application, which has been in for some time, but has been through a rigorous assessment, I think we would have been open to accusations of being unreasonable.
Would you indulge me one more question, Chair, on another subject?
How could I deny you anything, Councillor Powder?
Gary, what safeguards do we have for any public space to be subject to a potentially hostile application by somebody who's not the landowner? I'm not suggesting any impropriety by the current landowner or the current application, but we have public spaces all over this city. There's no need for you to be the landowner to put in an application. With this presumption that we can't demonstrate a 5-year supply of land, I'm very, very concerned that there may be other public spaces across the city that might be falling to this inability to demonstrate the 5-year supply of land.
It's a really difficult question to answer, really. I think, I'm sorry, I'm going to revert to you've got to assess the application that's before you, really, in that, you've got a particular set of circumstances.
Councillor Hans. Councillor Huben.
Thank you, Fee. Yes, thank you very much for the detailed report. I'd just like to explore the issue of privacy in a little more detail, please. You showed us, and we had it in our presentation previously, with the distances between the buildings on different sides of those. I was particularly interested in, it was S1 built, I think. Yes, there. So is that distance 18.19? Is that right? Yeah. Why is it taken from partway into the building?
That's because, as you can see here, this is a decked access arrangement. So the actual measurement is taken from inside the flats.
Oh, okay.
This
right,
is
yes.
the
Thank
access.
you. Yeah, thank you. And I think I remember from a previous application that the sort of acceptable distance is 15 metres as a minimum. Have I remembered that correctly?
As a local authority, we often get criticised for holding on to certain distances as the gold standard. I mean, traditionally it was 21 metres, but we've had appeal decisions which suggest you should look more contextually and look at the specifics of the uses involved and the distances involved. So in some circumstances, 15 might be acceptable, in others it might not. It's a case-by-case assessment, really.
Thank you. And could I just ask one question as well about the shadowing sunlight in general, the impact on neighbours? Thank you.
So this block actually, S1's impact on the South Town building is probably the worst of all of the impacts. And that's in terms of daylight. So I just remind myself from the report. Yeah, and that's where 8 rooms across the ground and first floor of the building will experience a medium adverse impact to daylight in accordance with the daylight and sunlight assessment. But we've accepted the justification that the use of the building isn't as sensitive as, for example, a house or a residential use or a dormitory. There's also the fact that the building is already single aspect, so it's already reliant on daylight, in terms of artificial lighting as well, and the degree of the impact as well in the case, as well as the NPPF's advice that you should apply daylight and sunlight assessments flexibly in order to not inhibit the effective development of a site. In terms of on Northcote Road, the report does assess that and explains that some of the buildings will experience a reduction, but we've provided the justification for that in those cases, and it is quite common, I'm sure Gary would agree, for developments to impact neighbouring daylight and sunlight, especially in a case like this where the site's currently so open that there will no doubt be impacts on daylight and sunlight. It's for us to, and for you to consider whether that's acceptable or not in the context of our policies.
Councillor Hatz.
Hello. Just going back to Philippa's point there. So the lines you've got there, I mean, you said that 18 metres is what you've got there. 21 metres used to be our standard, but it goes as low as 15. But you did say in your presentation that these were described as being generous distances. It doesn't. If it's 18 metres from the back of a balcony, which is, I don't know, metre and a half, and it's overlooking a school, it doesn't sound that generous to me. Was that a different bit I was looking at, or was that still Northcote Road?
This is where I refer to generous distances. That's 24 metres.
And is that from the actual building? Okay.
From the window.
So I'm slightly foxed by the generous comment, so forgive me for mishearing the wrong road there. Couple more questions. Going back to the biodiversity again, I understand completely, 4 came out quite recently, so I think we all get that. When did 3.1 come out?
I'm not sure of the exact date when that came out. I might have put it in the report.
I might have read it and forgotten it.
Sorry, bear with me 1 second, I'm just going to check.
All right. It was April last year. So that doesn't seem entirely unreasonable to suggest that perhaps in the space of a year they might want to upgrade. When was it originally put in? It was a while back, wasn't it, mine? Mm. Let's get some confirmation from Matthew here, sorry.
Sorry, bear with me, I'm just reading through my report.
It's okay. It's a very long report, I think you'll find. It's often hard to... I'm trying to look at anyone in the audience here.
Chair, there are experts in the audience who may be able to advise.
Yes, but I don't.
I think we better stick to the officers at this point. This is not an audience participation activity, Councillor Plowden.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
I think we're getting there for you.
That's all right. All things come to those who wait.
April 22 was when 3.1...
So it was a year ago when 3.1 came out. Okay, so that's less, that's significantly more than 4 weeks for 4. Okay, thank you. Another question I have is around the gated community aspect of things. I understand that the decision was to close it off as for antisocial behaviour reasons. How does that work? I mean, whose advice was taken? How does that work? Because I think all of us have parks in our wards where sometimes there's antisocial behaviour and sometimes the idea of gating it off is raised. And almost invariably the police say don't do that because people get shut inside at night. So what mitigation is there against people getting shut inside this development and then being stuck and potentially antisocial behaviour ensuing? I'm just a bit confused there. Can you advise, please?
So the management, well, we've had a framework management plan submitted which sets out that will be the responsibility of the management board. As part of the Section 106, we're going to require details of the full management plan, which would include those arrangements.
Okay, so they've already stipulated they're going to close it at night, but not how they're going to keep it safe at night or for anyone who might be visiting. It seems a little bit one-sided, if you'll forgive me, but I just wanted to check that there was... Okay, thank you.
But I would assume they'd have to employ somebody to do that, to shut the gates and to make sure no one's in there.
Yeah, if you shut the gates, people get stuck inside, don't they? So, anyway, okay. So that is as yet undecided then. Okay, thank you. Coming back to the design of the place, I mean, there's a fairly significant level of negative comments about the design of this particular development. I shan't go into the details. I think we've all heard them both, but both from people, members of the public, and from other organisations. How do you weigh up I understand that the provision of the public space and the provision of affordable housing, all of which I should imagine everyone in this room supports, have been weighed off against these very categorical negative comments that have been made both by council officers and externally. How do you balance that off? Can you give us a bit more detail? Because it seems a bit obscure to me. I'm not too sure how you arrived at that conclusion. Thank you.
So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, does it accord with the development plan? And from there, we have to look at the weight associated with a failure for instance, in not meeting the design policies. Other material considerations include those benefits, as well as the MPPF. We have to assess that taken as a whole and make the decision whether the scheme's negatives would significantly demonstrably outweigh its benefits. So it is just a judgment call and your judgment as well to weigh those benefits up and to see those as material considerations if they will act to outweigh the harm associated with the development.
Okay, so it is a pretty subjective judgment, really, isn't it?
It's a matter of planning judgment, yes. So it's clear, yeah, it's subjective.
I guess that's what we're here for, though, isn't it? So
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor Halfway.
Thanks, and sorry for dragging us back to the biodiversity net gain figure again, but there's an assertion in one of the statements that one of the changes brought forward in 3.1 is a clarification around the urban tree aspect of the calculator, and clearly the report states that that there's a significant number of urban trees that will be removed and more planted in its place. But as that seems to be quite a significant part of the the effect on the landscape, I just want to try and understand a bit more about how robust this figure is, this 36% figure is, given that. And the other question I had was just about the affordable element, the affordable housing element. Obviously 20% is the minimum required, and how secure is that those 40 houses being affordable?
Thanks, Chair. I'll try both of those. Again, I'm sorry, it's hard to really say what the difference would be between 3.0 and 3.1 B&G metric. It's been identified that the urban tree factor is one of the differences between those two metrics, but without the assessment we can't say. But at the moment you've got 36% under metric 3 and aiming at a target that isn't a target at the moment. So eventually end of the year we'll have a 10% legal target, so we don't know what the difference is, but there is no target, you see what I mean. So again, it's just, I'm sorry we can't be any clearer than that, but you're just going to have to kind of factor that into your weighing up of the issues. The affordable housing, so the policy requirement is of course 40, but as established for a number of years now, through the threshold approach and in relation to speedy delivery, 20% is suggested to be accepted in the circumstances where the delivery is secured quickly, and obviously this meets that. So the Section 106 agreement will require the 20% as set out in the report, and if for whatever reason the 106 isn't signed by the applicants on that basis, then it would come back before you as members, because it's obviously a major benefit that we're asking you to give significant weight to. But on the assumption that that the Section 106 would be signed in those circumstances, because we've heard from day one that no kind of signal that the applicants are going kind of cold on that issue at all, then it'd be a legal requirement that is kind of put in place as part of the development of the site. It's secured in the normal way that we secure affordable housing through lots of development that we give permission to. And it doesn't, we review a lot of them, and it isn't problematic generally.
So there's no risk then of a developer coming in to take the site forward and through their own viability assessment, that figure going down?
There's the permission, if it becomes a permission, would absolutely be subject to the 20% affordable housing delivery. A permission only becomes real if it's then implemented. So as with any permission, so any proposal you've dealt with in the last few years that you've secured affordable housing on, it is open to any applicant to choose not to be bound by that and apply for something different. You know, it could be different in so many different ways, but they'd all be subject to a fresh consultation and fresh judgment by officers advising you and therefore yourselves as a committee. So in theory, it could be someone coming in with less than that in terms of affordable housing, but that would have to be assessed on its merits, really. So again, I can only kind of pull you back to the application that's before you and the judgment that needs to be made there.
Tom, are you finished? Sorry. Paul.
Thanks, Chair. I'm glad we're talking about social housing now, because obviously I think that's a major part of this application. In terms of the need for social housing in Bristol, and the need obviously for every part of the city to play its part in having social housing, should we give any weight to how much social housing there is in Clifton Ward, and whether it should be shared out, and whether social tenants should have the right to live all over the city?
So I think that the housing need is a city-wide issue, and everyone here understands that fully, of course, and that's set out in the local plan. So the local plan sets out a requirement for a level of affordable delivery that is realistic, and that was set quite some time ago, though, through conventional means, and then that leads to the policies that say in particular parts of the city, maybe the outer areas of the city, 30% is likely to be viable, whereas in more central wards, central areas of the city, including the one we're talking about now, then 40% is the requirement. Now, a number of years ago, that was reviewed, and whilst the policy requirement hasn't changed, the Affordable Housing Practice Note drilled into a little bit more detail and said, well, what are we actually achieving? And actually, could we, in the interests of delivery on the ground, which is the most important thing, could we consider a threshold approach of 20%, but absolutely on the understanding that it's delivered quickly, and if it isn't delivered quickly, that deal's off, really, that kind of arrangement would expire. So I think within all but one of the 40% areas, which I think was the north-west area within the local plan, so that doesn't include this area, that threshold approach of 20% was applied. So, yeah, absolutely, within this ward, within this area, 20% is what the Affordable Housing Practice Note directs decision-making towards.
If we've exhausted the questions, shall we now move to the debate? I'll have my go first, if that's okay. For 185 years, Bristol Zoo, based at Clifton Downs, has been at the centre of Bristol life. Some people have suggested that I may have been on the council for most of that time, but I can assure you after some council meetings I feel I have. It has been, in my view, and Bristolians, the flagship for education, conservation, tourism, and what we now call the wider leisure industry since then. We've heard the arguments by the Trust for actually responding to 21st century standards of animal care and education and conservation, relocating it wild place. And clearly, therefore, they are seeking to utilise their vacated premises and also actually produce a significant investment, and rightly so. So it seems to me we have to accept that, to move forward from that. is housing use here appropriate? Obviously, we're looking at under 200 residential properties. As Councillor Goggin remarks, 20% are policy compliant affordable housing, which in my view is welcome. And more to the point, while in fact this scheme is characterful in my view, and also lower density than elsewhere in Clifton, they are seeking to actually preserve 80% of the land as communal open space. Frankly, I think it would be very difficult to find another similar applicant in the land who was doing that. So Bristol should view, in my view, should view it in those terms. I welcome the fact that there's proposed to be more accessible to livability to the site. I don't actually think it should be 24/7. I'm happy with the proposed daytime entry, of course. I welcome the biodiversity of the proposal, that it aims to be over 30% adding to the BNF, which is very positive. And we've heard about various disputes about the calculation, but in my view, it's a positive gain, of course, and a very significant positive gain, perhaps 4 times as much as once planned. There will be trees lost, but the Trust have actually put TPOs, or got TPOs put on 24 or so, and also for the trees which will be felled to allow building to happen, 470 trees will be replanted, which is far and away beyond the Bristol tree standard. So I think there's a positive story there. Looking at the design, it does seem to me actually a very a well-designed and impressive scheme. The scale and the massing of the elevations accord to the neighbouring heights on all barring the north-facing downside. So that seems appropriate while seeking to actually maximise, but not exclusively, not excessively, the land at stake. So I'll certainly be voting in favour of this scheme. It seems overwhelmingly a very positive investment, and I wish the zoo at their new location every success. B.
Oh dear, Chair, I think we might fall out about this. I'm afraid I don't agree with some of the conclusions that you've made. I think, along with a lot of people in this room, we wish the applicants well with their ventures at Wildspace, what was Wildspace, but as you'll see, that's not on the list of reasons to set aside some of the, some of the problems with this one. I've got a couple of problems that there's still some big questions for me around the management of the public space, which I think should have been resolved by now in order to ensure that it will remain a public space. That is persuasive. I am also persuaded that we do need to put housing on this site, quite definitely. However, the promise of 20% affordable housing is not, for me, enough of... It feels like having a gun put to our head, that either you vote for affordable housing and something which I find to be really mind-bendingly ugly, and I don't appear to be alone in that, or we vote against something and we deny people affordable housing. I cannot believe there is not another way, as other people have said, to provide housing and affordable housing on this site. One of the applicants said that this development sits discreetly behind the boundaries of the zoo. I can't agree with that description. It seems anything but discreet. It seems overbearing, it is harmful to the heritage, to the local heritage. Its scale and massing, and this isn't me saying this is people who know far more than I do, architects even. The scale and massing is excessive, and it also cannot be considered to be well designed, apparently, according to our own officers. So, whilst I wish them well, and I believe housing is appropriate, of some variety is appropriate on this site. I cannot approve this particular application, and I would like the applicants to go back and think again on those grounds.
Thanks. Paul Goggin. Paul.
Thank you. The historic buildings are being kept, they're being restored. A lot of people in my ward, for example, Hartcliffe and Witherwood, they couldn't afford to go to the zoo. It's 20 odd quid to get in, but now they'll be able to visit the gardens. I don't know, when I was a kid, the local park shut at night, and the park keeper went around with his whistle and chased everyone out. So I don't really have a problem with it being locked. The biodiversity net gain of 36%, whether that metric, I mean, the officers have followed national guidance to stick with the same metric that they started with. 30 units of social housing, 30 families from our waiting list will get the great opportunities to live in such a beautiful area right next to the Downs. There's a large children's play area being put in. You know, our parks are something that a lot of people campaign for, rightly so, but the funding for them is, you know, limited. So this is an extra park in the city. Passive house principles, air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, PVs. And we hear about doubling the training places from the university from 300 to 600 for the next generation of zoologists. A reduction in traffic because it's no longer a tourist attraction. And I believe our legal officers' assurances about free access in perpetuity. The Terrace Theatre, public and community events, the entrance, the Clifton Conservation Hub, public toilets, again, something that people have campaigned to try and have. A cafe and exhibition space, home to Avon Gorge, and 470 new trees, as you said, Chair. Sorry, but I what's not to like? I'll be supporting this.
Councillor Bowden.
I think we've all got to accept we're not going to get the zoo back, and it's not a modern or suitable provision anymore, and the alternative that the zoo is proposing is clearly better. But my concerns today are really with this application, not with other zoos that may be built on the back of it. I accept that the zoos worked very, very hard to embed some principles and values into the proposal. I really like the way that I'd like to see a lot more applicants assuming that trees should be protected rather than very quickly moving to the tree replacement standard, and I commend the zoo for doing that. I commend the free access. For the first time in history, it will be free to access these gardens, which I commend. And obviously a lot of heritage gain and a lot of benefits that Councillor Goggins has just listed, which are undeniable. But I don't think some of those principles and values have been seen through to the many detailed assumptions and calculations that have been made in doing the finer assessments here. So I have 4 problems. One is, in principle, this is not an allocated site for housing. This is an allocated open space site. And I do believe that the zoo could have handled this debate differently rather than presenting us with a fait accompli. There's clearly different funding mechanisms for the maintaining the garden and the open space. There's a lot of different use options that apparently have been in a report by KPMG, which we haven't seen. And so I'd much rather see genuine engagement, not a fait accompli. I don't believe that this protects and enhances the heritage of a conservation area. And I think the mass, the height, and the quality of design have all been slated by officers and many members of the public. And it's clearly the size of this development is not ancillary to being an ongoing use as an open space, which is in the report. Thirdly, biodiversity and sustainability, given the zoo's mission, I feel should have been exemplarily assessment. and I'm not convinced they are. In fact, I'm quite shocked that parking problems is a key justification for the zoo closing. And lastly, the justification of best value, I believe, is misinterpreted. We're no longer in a world of compulsory competitive tendering. As someone once said, accountants or cynics understand the cost of everything but the value of nothing. There are environmental, social, moral, and other considerations, not just financial, that should have been put into best value considerations by the zoo, if that is an obligation of theirs. So in summary, I'm not willing to accept the unquestioning justification by spreadsheet of the number of units required, given that there are different funding models available to maintain the gardens. And I urge the committee to reject this in the interest of public debate, a clear and open, transparent appraisal of all the options. Thank you.
Tom.
Thank you. I've struggled with this one. I've kind of been flip-flopping between two ways throughout the debate. I think what it comes down to for me, though, is that this is clearly an exceptional site, and it should be an exceptional application. And there are definitely exceptional bits in there. Paul's listed all the benefits. Having that open space, it would go from a private, gated commercial space to one that people can actually access, probably for more hours of the day than you could when the zoo was open. But for this application, I shouldn't be feeling this, loathsome about approving it. So I'm afraid the zoo should have been jumping up and down at the chance to use that new biodiversity net gain calculator. Conservation is their stated aim. So that is one of the things that is really holding me back, and I'm going to have to vote against it, I'm afraid.
John.
Just like Tom, really. I'm flip-flopping on this one. And I agree that I think over the overbearing design, the two big things for me were the open space and the biodiversity, and it was such a big factor of this application. I'm surprised they weren't coming up with every single metric possible to show how amazing this was for the environment. But listening to Councillor Goggin, I think he's tipped me over the edge, and I'll be voting for it. And I don't want to say reluctantly, because I don't think we should be taking into account what the zoo could have done with this land, and etc., etc. It's the application we have in front of us, and that's what we're judging. Is it compliant? Would it stand an appeal if we refuse it and it goes to appeal? So I'll be voting for it.
Andrew.
Thank you, Chairman. You may find this hard to believe, but I grew up in the 1970s in Weston-super-Mare, and a very early memory is a school trip to Bristol Zoo. And obviously with my family, we visited on many occasions as well. So I'm part of that collective memory that we have in the city of this wonderful, wonderful zoo of ours. But of course, we have to accept that we now live in the 21st century, and our attitudes toward animal welfare have changed. And I clearly accept the idea that the zoo is no longer fit for purpose, certainly from an animal welfare point of view, but also in terms of reduced visitor numbers and parking as well. So, it is a really difficult scheme, actually. And I think there are many commendable aspects which Paul has listed. For me, especially the public access, the free public access is a fantastic bonus, not just for Clifton, but for the wider community as well. And of course, the restoration of heritage assets, the fact there will be a fantastic community hub bordering the Downs with cafe and toilet facilities, something that's sorely missing in that location. And of course, it's a sustainable development in a sustainable location, and we have a great need for more housing. However, having said all that, looking at the slides, the visuals, I do have a problem with the scale and the massing and the height of the perimeter buildings, and also the fact that vehicles will be introduced onto the site for the very first time. I also agree that it's very disappointing that a conservation charity hasn't gone the extra mile and really kind of put forward, passive housing, carbon neutral housing, whatever. That should have been the starting point, really. But I think on balance, these harms are kind of outweighed by the benefits of much needed housing in a sustainable location. In my ward of Brislington West, we have, I think, half a dozen developments on the table, and that's going to bring probably 1,000 housing units to help towards the city's housing crisis. We're all being called upon in all parts of Bristol to help solve Bristol's housing crisis, and it is a crisis. And I don't think Clifton should be any different. So I will be voting for this scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think I agree with the people over there that it is a really, really difficult one, and I really sort of thank everybody for all their efforts and time in writing, in making videos, in commissioning reports and so on, and it really is a difficult one. There's an absolutely undeniable need for housing in Bristol. I get so much in my my inbox is full of people with unsuitable housing. I think this will go some way towards helping to solve that problem. The English Heritage, who we have to sort of put quite a great weight on, they're saying there's going to be less than substantial harm. I do acknowledge there will be some harm, but I feel that English Heritage, we have to trust their judgment that it's less than substantial. And I actually walked around at the weekend, did a walk around the perimeter, and certainly noticing from the north side that if you're on the downs, you as the visuals show, you can't really see it, particularly when the trees are there. And there's nobody on that bit of downs anyway. It's not a very nice bit of downs. It's just where all the traffic is. And yes, I do recognise that there will be some, people in some of those houses, it will be difficult for them. But I think we've got to, with this difficult balancing act, I think the greater good here is to accept the development.
Yeah, so I also agree with Councillor Goggin and co-councillors that are actually agreeing with this development. We continue talking about this biodiversity and the calculations that they're using, and you will see that the 3.1 that we are using, it was in place at the time of the application. So when you have to balance whether we're going to use 3.1 or 4 point, it's only just come in 4 weeks ago. So I think that to go back on it wouldn't be viable. So I agree with the planning officers on this one with the calculations they've used. I agree it was a difficult decision, and I'm sure that all the councillors here agree with me that the decisions, whatever your decisions have been taken now, hasn't been taken lightly, and everything has been taken into consideration. And I think that in regards to the access, I'm happy with the section 278 and the section 106 that will embed in regard to the access and the traffic control. And so I will be voting for it. And I with Councillor Eddy's comments as well, I agree with all of that. And I think that, although not taken lightly, it's something that I will agree with to go ahead with.
Thank you. Before moving to the vote in a moment, Gary Collins wants to just make a small clarification.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. Never want to interrupt the debate, but just in terms of factual issue, the metric that the applicant have relied upon here is 3.0, not 3.1.
Apologies.
So the assessment hasn't been done in accordance with 3.1, which came in April 22, just so that everyone's completely aware what you're deciding the application on.
Fine. Thank you for that. Can I formally therefore move the officer approval subject to the section 106 and the conditions? Paul, seconded. So I'll now do a name vote as normal. I'll vote for. John?
For.
Andrew?
For.
Tom?
Against.
Fee?
Against.
Ed?
Against.
Farah?
4.
Philip?
4.
And Paul?
4.
So that's overwhelmingly approved. Thank you. Although we don't have a second application, so I do have a number of brief business items. So if I can ask... Oh, yeah. Sorry, Gary also reminded me there's a listed building application. So if I could ask the public to quietly depart.
Vote on the list of building application, or what's the...
Oh, that's separate.
It was a separate application.
Oh, sorry. Well, to do it, Bob. Sorry, could I just say, Gary's just reminded me we have formally voted on the main one, but apparently we have to do separately the listed building application. So can I formally move that for second? I'll vote for John. Andrew?
4.
Tom?
Against.
Fee?
I think against. I'm not entirely sure what we're voting on, but there we go.
Ed?
Against.
Farah?
4.
Philippa?
4.
And Paul. That's overwhelmingly passed. Right. Could I, remaining members of the public, could they quietly just leave, please? I can assure members after quite a demanding debate I won't detain you much longer, so Councillor Hance will be able to get off to the opera and change appropriate things. Though I must say actually sometimes the drama of this council chamber actually exceeds any opera. It forced me just to do 3 departures or 3 farewells. Matthew Blunt, the case officer, who so excellently presented today, and he's worked very hard during his time with the council, is leaving us tomorrow, so his timing couldn't be more impeccable, of course. So, Matthew, can I sincerely thank you for your hard work, including today, and wish you, on behalf of members and officers, all best wishes in your future career. The second person is our own Councillor Garking. It won't have missed most members. Councillor Goggin or Paul will be shortly elevated to the esteemed position of Lord Mayor of the City and County of Bristol, or as I may be reminded, the County and City of Bristol, since we were a county quite a bit earlier. Paul, I'm sure you'll do very well and thoroughly enjoy yourself. Certainly in my experience, you've served with us on the cross-councillor team at the Bishops with Village Quiz for quite a few years. If you bring a fraction of the gifts and skills to your civic year, you bring that, we will be well served. But please don't worry about doing any, singing also. That's unnecessary. Can I also say, personally and collectively, we'll miss your, what my Bristolian grandmother always called, brand of copper-bottom common sense. So we look forward to you, hopefully in future, rejoining us if that's your will. So, thank you, Paul. Councillor O'Rourke has missed that opportunity, so I'm sure you would too. Finally, last but by no means least, I move to our own Gary Collins on my right. Now, Gary's served this city nobly for 16 years as head of development management, and during that time he's had a raft of big, meaningful, significant and often controversial decisions. I asked him just to remind me, and of course both arena applications, Temple Island and up the Brafferson site, went through him. The Blackberry Hill Hospital site, all the Bedminster Green plots and sites, carriage work in Stokescroft, the big Metro bus application, which I still quote to Gary, because the officer went on and bloody on during the presentation, which is one of the reasons I now demand only 5-minute summaries. The old BRI, the St Mary Laporte application, Temple Quay, O'Hengro Park, and of course the Ashton Gate Sporting Quarter. It does seem probably on AOB I accompany you on most of that journey, Gary, but we all thank you for your skills, your contribution and hard work, and it's a thankless task, but thank you for trying to keep me on the straight and narrow over the last 2 years, and we wish you every success in the next stage of your professional career. So that was my only matters of outstanding business. So can I remind you, our next meeting, the AGM, is 31st of May, 2023 at 2:30, and formally close the meeting. Thank you. You're free to change.